Hello everyone and welcome back to another explosive episode of Nuclear Revenge. So today I've got 3 jaw-dropping tales you won't want to miss. If you enjoy stories like these, like and subscribe to help this channel grow. This first story's titled The Landlord Who Lit His Own Fire. You'd think that after prison, rock bottom would be in the rear view. But when I signed the lease, fresh out and eager for a second shot, I had no idea I'd walked into a trap disguised as an apartment. The place wasn't perfect, cracked tiles, ancient wiring, but it was mine. Or at least, it was supposed to be. My landlord, who I'll just call ED, was the kind of man who smiled with his teeth and lied with his eyes. The kind of guy who acted like giving you a roof over your head made him a saint. For a while, I bought into it. Rent was cheap, and I was too busy rebuilding my life to question why. Then winter rolled in like a freight train. The heat went out one morning in December. I gave it a day, then another. On the third day, I started calling. Nothing, just voicemail. I wasn't the only one freezing. My neighbors were wrapped in layers, huddling around stoves like we were back in the 1800s. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of sleeping in the kitchen, burning through electricity just to keep from freezing. 2 weeks of ED dodging our calls, ignoring the very laws that were supposed to keep people like him in check. When he finally answered, his tone was dripping with mockery. "The law gives me a reasonable time to fix it," he said. Reasonable. We were counting the frostbite on our fingers and he was quoting statutes like they were shields. Then, like clockwork, ED got his electricity bill. That's when the real chaos began. He tried to raise our rent. We laughed. He refused to pay the electric company. We stopped laughing. The power shut off completely a few days later. I'm not the kind of man who lets injustice fester. Something in me, something honed during years of survival, snapped. I dove into research, obsessed like a surgeon before an operation. I tore through landlord-tenant laws, state codes, building ordinances. I found enough violations to make a judge choke. And it wasn't just me. ED had managed to piss off every single tenant. They were scared, sure, financially strapped and weathering this hellstorm. But when I showed them what I'd found, their fears started to turn into fire. But ED wasn't done. One night, just after New Year's, I woke to smoke alarms screaming. The building was on fire. I ran barefoot and shaking into a hallway black with smoke. I pulled neighbors from their beds, kicked doors, shouted warnings. Someone didn't make it out in time. A kid, maybe, I still don't know. But I saw ED the next day, slipping an envelope of cash to the sister of the tenant in the burned-out unit. My blood ran colder than the January wind. The fire was no accident. Arson. That's what the investigators called it 2 weeks later. Hairspray used as an accelerant. Evidence hidden in a punched-out hole in the drywall. The same unit ED had conveniently kept current on rent. The only tenant who hadn't been behind. He thought he was clever. He thought the fire would break us, that the cold would chase us off. But all he did was light the match on his own destruction. What ED didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, is that I had already started to dig my claws into his world. I started fixing his computers. At first, he was skeptical, but desperation does funny things. I told him I was a computer tech, played the part, smiled, nodded, listened, and he let me in. The passwords came first, then the access to his systems, emails, financial records, documents he didn't even know were still on his hard drives. I copied it all. Then I printed every file, sent reports to every code enforcement agency I could find. Dozens of violations across multiple properties. I had photos, timestamps, statements. I made sure every agency got a copy. And that was just the beginning. ED had declared war on decency. Now it was my turn to burn his empire down, brick by rotten brick. By the end of January, I'd turn his empire of rot into a ticking time bomb. ED had no clue the extent of the damage waiting to detonate in his inboxes, his mail slots, his life. But the spark wasn't mine to strike, it was his own carelessness. I simply guided the flame. The city inspectors hit first, for buildings flagged, immediate occupancy violations, unsafe electrical systems, mold, structural decay. One of the inspectors, a wiry man in a windbreaker, said it was one of the worst he'd seen in 20 years. He didn't know it was all coordinated, but I did. Tenants were finally speaking up. Quiet people with cold hands and broken backs. I had printed their complaints, cataloged their photos, assembled timelines. The reports looked like something out of a prosecution manual. And ED? He was clueless until the citations started showing up. He called me one night, voice tight, desperate. "Hey, you know anything about this crap the city's doing? I mean, this is harassment, right?" I played dumb. Harassment? That's crazy. Must be someone with a vendetta. Yeah. Probably some bum with too much time on their hands. I laughed. I didn't say a word about the drive full of incriminating evidence tucked behind a false panel in my closet, or the recording of him trying to bribe a tenant into torching a building, or the fact that, after he handed me the keys to his digital kingdom, I'd also installed backdoor software that copied every new message and transaction in real time. That fire? That was his undoing. The insurance company opened an investigation. The fire marshal got suspicious. When I anonymously submitted a copy of that surveillance photo handing off cash to the woman outside the burned building, it all came crashing down. Police showed up at his door with a warrant. The trial took months. During that time, his buildings crumbled under the weight of scrutiny. He tried evicting tenants who spoke out. That blew up in his face. Code violations mounted. Fines accumulated. The banks called in his loans. One by one, he started selling off his properties just to stay afloat. But his image was already ruined. Word spread. No one wanted to do business with a slumlord under federal investigation. Local papers ran headlines with words like fraud, arson, conspiracy, tenant endangerment. I didn't have to say a word. I'd already handed everything off to people whose job was to tear man like him apart. The final blow? His own attorney turned on him, claimed he wasn't paid, filed a civil suit. That suit led to discovery of even more financial fraud, fake invoices, tax evasion, identity theft of former tenants. I know. I printed them. I watched the trial from the back of the courtroom. Didn't need to testify. My part had already been played. He was convicted on multiple counts: fraud, endangerment, and accessory to arson. Got 5 years, and that's not counting the civil penalties. He never even suspected it was me. I moved out of that apartment a week after he was sentenced. Not because I had to. I just didn't want to breathe the same air that still clung to his legacy. A month later, most of his properties were condemned or sold off at auction. I helped a few of the tenants find better places. Some of them stayed in touch. They called me a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who got cold, got angry, and did what needed to be done. And last I heard, he's learning the meaning of heat behind bars. This next story is titled "He Took Credit for My Work, Lied to HR, and Got Me Fired." Some people call it justice. Others call it revenge. I call it balance, because if someone sets fire to your life, you have every right to return with gasoline and a match. I used to work for a company that prided itself on its family values. You know the type. Monthly birthday parties, motivational posters, all-hands meetings where the CEO tells you how much your work matters. Lies. All of it. Beneath the surface, it was a meat grinder with a smile. For 5 years, I gave them everything. I was in early, stayed late, covered holidays. I climbed fast, maybe too fast. My manager at the time, Jeff, didn't take well to that. Jeff liked being the smartest man in the room, liked when people laughed at his jokes, even when they weren't funny. He didn't like questions, didn't like competence, and above all, he hated anyone who made him feel replaceable. At first, I chalked up the tension to normal office politics. I ignored the credit he took for my work, the meetings I wasn't invited to, the sudden change in tone whenever I spoke up. I thought if I worked harder, I could earn his respect. What a joke. The turning point came when I landed a major account that was on the verge of walking. I'd spent 2 months rebuilding trust with their team after Jeff had botched the relationship the year before. I pulled long nights, flew out on weekends, even took a client's mother to a last-minute doctor's appointment to keep the deal alive. That contract brought in over $2 million in revenue. 2 days later, Jeff announced at our quarterly meeting that the client had returned thanks to some renewed leadership and strategic thinking on our side. Everyone clapped. He smiled like a man who just stole a crown. I didn't say anything. I knew how that game worked. But that night, when I confronted him privately, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're paid to produce, not to get applause." I told myself I'd swallow the pride, build leverage, wait for my moment. It never came. 3 weeks later, I was called into HR. They said there were concerns about my expense reports, allegations of fraud, false receipts, inflated mileage, unauthorized hotel stays. I laughed. I thought it was a prank, but they weren't joking. Jeff had flagged the reports himself. I knew immediately what was happening. He'd gone through my documentation, twisted just enough numbers, and framed it to look shady. It didn't matter that I had receipts. It didn't matter that some of the reports were from trips he approved. What mattered was perception, and Jeff had planted just enough doubt. They temporarily suspended me pending an investigation. I knew what that meant. They were giving themselves time to scrub my name from the good projects, to transfer my accounts, to replace me. I got a call a week later. My employment was terminated. Irreconcilable financial discrepancies. No severance, no references, just a stain on my name and a whisper campaign I couldn't fight. I went home that night and didn't move from the couch for 12 hours. My girlfriend tried to console me, but I was beyond comfort. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry. I was quiet, cold, focused, because in that moment, I knew something with absolute clarity. Jeff had declared war, and I wasn't going to lose. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I pulled up every document I'd ever saved, every email, every screenshot. I started drawing lines, mapping connections. Jeff wasn't just a backstabber, he was dirty. I'd always suspected it. The way his numbers never matched his work ethic. The sudden spike in bonuses. The contractors who somehow got work without any bidding process. It took 2 months to gather what I needed. 2 months of scraping old hard drives, contacting former coworkers, finding patterns. I started with one simple rule. If he burned my reputation, I would burn everything else. I tracked down a former intern who told me how Jeff forced her to drive him around on weekends under the pretense of team bonding. She'd never filed a complaint, too scared it would hurt her career. I found a contractor who admitted Jeff asked for a finder's fee in cash for helping him land the project. I traced the wire transfers from a shell account Jeff set up through a dummy LLC his brother-in-law owned. I went to an old friend in legal and told him what I had. He looked through the files, the bank statements, the emails. Then he said 2 words that lit the fuse. It's actionable. But I didn't go to court. Not yet. I knew Jeff. Court wouldn't scare him. Embarrassment would. Exposure would. So I took a different path. I started with anonymous emails. Tips sent to compliance. To HR. To the CFO. I sent one every 2 days for 3 weeks. Each one was more detailed than the last. Documents attached. Names included. Accounts highlighted. Then I went to the press. I found a journalist who covered corporate fraud. A woman who had taken down bigger fish than Jeff. I didn't give her everything. Just enough to pique interest. She agreed to meet me in a diner halfway between the city and my nowhere apartment. I slid a flash drive across the table. Everything on here is verified, I said. You'll find contact info for everyone quoted. I've redacted what I can't confirm. The rest speaks for itself. She raised an eyebrow. You're not asking for a byline? I'm asking for a reckoning. The article dropped on a Wednesday morning. The headline wasn't subtle. Corporate climber or criminal? Insider alleges massive fraud at mid-level tech firm. By noon, it was the top trending story on every platform that mattered in our industry. Screenshots of wire transfers, quotes from whistleblowers, an entire section about the toxic culture of coercion cultivated by a senior manager identified only as Jay. The company tried to contain the blaze, but they were already choking on the smoke. Clients called in asking questions. The board demanded an internal review. HR launched a second investigation, not into me, but into Jeff. He didn't know I was behind it. Not yet. But I made sure the idea started to creep in. I sent him an anonymous message, just one sentence. Funny how the truth always finds the surface. I used a burner email, routed through a VPN across 3 countries. He couldn't trace it, but it rattled him. I heard from a friend still inside the company that Jeff looked like a ghost that day. He locked his office door, canceled meetings, left early. It wasn't enough. I wasn't done. A week later, I sent the journalist a second flash drive. This one had the recordings. Jeff wasn't careful with his words when he thought he was among friends. At a company retreat 2 years earlier, he'd gone off script at the afterparty, mouthing off to a contractor about how easy it was to manipulate the kids in compliance and juice the numbers when no one's watching. The contractor had recorded the conversation, said he was worried Jeff might throw him under the bus someday. He never had to. I did it for him. The audio went public. That was the crack in the dam. The company suspended Jeff pending a formal review. He was locked out of the system. The board brought in forensic accountants. And just like that, the tide turned, but I wasn't there to see it. I wasn't in the office when the VP of operations stormed out of a conference room, or when the CTO slammed her laptop shut in disgust. I didn't need to be. I was working a job at a non-profit by then, less money, more peace. It wasn't about reinstatement. It wasn't about redemption. It was about making sure the man who torched my life felt the same fire crawling up his neck. Then came the subpoenas. One of the shell companies Jeff used to move funds had failed to file the right taxes. The IRS got involved. Federal, not corporate. Not civil. Real consequences. I got a call from my lawyer. They're building a case, he said. Looks like your guy's going to be charged. He paused. They might want your testimony. I agreed. Under one condition, I would testify under a sealed identity. I didn't need the spotlight. I just wanted to watch Jeff squirm. The trial was quick. Fraud, embezzlement, ethics violations. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. No parole. No cushy white-collar lockup. Real time. Real cells. The company issued a public apology, said they regretted the oversight, promised to rebuild trust. They never called me, never offered to reinstate me, or clear my name. I didn't need them to. A month later, Jeff's wife filed for divorce. I heard through mutuals that she left the state, took the kids, sold the house. I drove past it once, just to see. For sale sign crooked in the yard, weeds in the driveway, a shell of a life built on lies. That's when I knew it was over. I didn't take pleasure in his destruction. That's not what this was about. It was about the truth, about proving to myself that I wasn't crazy, that what happened to me mattered, that the man in the corner office, with his fake smile and his weaponized ambition, could fall. And he did. Hard. 1 year later, I got a letter from one of the interns who'd left the company during the scandal. She told me she was starting a non-profit to help whistleblowers come forward safely. She said my story inspired her. She didn't know who I was. Didn't have to. That was enough. This last story is titled The Shady Shop Owner. I've worked in car shops most of my life. It's honest work, if not clean. You get used to the grit under your fingernails, the smell of old oil, the sting of a knuckle split open on a rusty bolt. It's a rhythm, tools on metal, the hum of the lift, and the quiet understanding between men who fix things for a living. That's where I was when this all started. At a shop on the edge of a tired town, halfway between nowhere and forgotten. It wasn't much, a two-bay garage with cracked concrete floors, a front office that doubled as a waiting room, and a line of beaters and pickups that kept the lights on. My name's Caleb. I wasn't the owner, just the lead mechanic. Been there 7 years. Showed up every day at 6:30, coffee in hand, boots already dirty. Never minded the work. Never asked for more than a fair wage and some peace. That peace ended the day Reggie bought the shop. Reggie was the kind of man who wore sunglasses indoors and smiled like he was posing for a picture. Big talker, fast hands, always had some side hustle, some investment opportunity. I didn't trust him the moment he walked in. He bought the place from old Marty when the man's lungs gave out. Paid in cash, no inspection. Said he wanted to modernize the operation. We all knew what that meant. Cheap parts, overpriced services, pressure sales. But I kept my head down. I'd seen owners come and go. Most didn't last. Reggie didn't like that I wasn't impressed. He liked yes men, the kind of guys who laughed at his jokes and didn't ask questions when he shaved labor hours from their paychecks. I didn't laugh. Didn't stop him from trying to make me. He'd come into the bay while I was elbow deep in a timing belt and start running his mouth. You know, Caleb, you got the hands of a surgeon, but the personality of a corpse. I didn't answer. Just kept working. You ever think about loosening up? Maybe coming out for a drink? Meet some people who shower more than once a week? Still nothing. That silence made him nervous. Guys like Reggie thrive on noise, on distraction. When they don't get a reaction, they push harder, meaner. He started messing with my orders, told the parts distributor to route all calls through him, changed suppliers without telling me. I'd open a box expecting OEM and find knockoff junk. Customer comes in with a busted water pump, I fix it. 3 days later it fails again, and Reggie tells them I must have installed it wrong. When I confronted him, he just grinned. Mistakes happen, man. That's why we have warranties. I started documenting everything. Every bad part, every complaint, every time Reggie marked up prices on the invoice after I'd signed off. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. Not yet. Just had a feeling I might need it. Then came the kid. His name was Jason. 19. Fresh out of trade school. Reggie hired him as an apprentice, said he wanted to invest in young talent. What he really wanted was someone too green to know he was being exploited. Jason was eager, respectful, asked questions, stayed late, reminded me of myself back when I thought hard work was enough. I took him under my wing, showed him the things school doesn't teach you, how to feel a misfire through the frame, how to tell a warped rotor by the pulse in the pedal. Reggie hated it. He started feeding Jason bad advice behind my back, told him torque specs were just suggestions, that upselling unneeded services was part of the game. I caught Jason topping off a brake reservoir with the wrong fluid and nearly lost it. Not at him, at Reggie. When I pulled the kid aside, he looked ashamed. I didn't know. Reggie said it was fine. I told him to double-check everything Reggie said, to come to me if he had doubts. That sealed it. 2 weeks later, Reggie wrote me up for insubordination, said I was disrupting the management hierarchy. The paperwork was laughable, misspelled words, vague infractions. I didn't sign it. The next day, he cut my hours. I came in to find another guy in my lift, one of Reggie's buddies from the city. No experience, no certification, just a clipboard and a cocky grin. Reggie called it cross-training. I called it what it was. A warning. That night, I went home and pulled out the folder I'd been keeping. It was thicker than I realized. Photos, invoices, customer complaints, texts Reggie had sent about faking diagnostics to pad bills. Enough to make someone look twice, but not enough to make them care. Not unless it got personal. So I made it personal. I started by feeding the fire. Every time Reggie screwed over a customer, I kept a copy of the work order. I called a few of them later, quietly, off the clock. Told them they might want to get a second opinion. A few shrugged it off, but some were angry. One woman, an older nurse who brought in her son's Corolla for a brake job, nearly cried when I told her he'd charged her for rotors that were never replaced. They didn't all come back, but enough did. Enough to start asking questions, complaining, demanding refunds. Reggie blamed the new guy, Then Jason told them they weren't documenting things properly. I watched him scream at the kid over a $60 discrepancy while pocketing 3 times that in bogus markups every day. Jason quit a week later, didn't say goodbye, just left his gloves on the bench and walked out. That was the last straw. I stopped thinking about right and wrong. I started thinking about damage. I knew Reggie had secrets. Guys like him always do. The trick was finding the one that mattered, the one he couldn't afford to be exposed. So I did what I do best. I got my hands dirty. I started showing up an hour early, left an hour late. While he was in the office flirting with the parts rep or bragging about his latest crypto bet, I was scanning, pulling files from the computer, checking invoices against deliveries, noting every time a car came in with a CEL and left with the lights still mysteriously off. Then I got lucky. Reggie had a habit. After hours, he'd bring his car inside the bay, pull the door halfway shut, and start working on what he called his side projects. One night, I doubled back to grab my phone charger and saw the truth. He wasn't repairing anything. He was flipping Vince. There was a totaled BMW in the back corner of the lot, one that should have been stripped for parts. But Reggie was transferring plates, swapping interior parts, even copying the VIN plate from the wreck to another car just like it. The implications were massive insurance fraud, title laundering, maybe worse. I took pictures, video, even scraped off a few shavings from the forged VIN tag and sealed them in an envelope with a timestamp. Now I had him, but it still wasn't enough. I wanted him humiliated, ruined. I wanted him to see his empire fall from the inside. So I set the trap. First, I contacted a local journalist who'd written about shady repair shops before. I gave her just enough anonymized documents, photos, fake estimates, told her more was coming. She agreed to dig. Then, I contacted the DMV fraud division, gave them a burner email, sent 1 picture a day, each more damning than the last. Finally, I made sure Reggie kept thinking I was beaten. I played the quiet mechanic, did the minimum, smiled at his jokes, let him think he'd won, until the day the inspectors came. It started slow, a routine visit, paperwork, license checks, inventory logs. Reggie swaggered around like he owned the place, offered them coffee, cracked jokes, but they didn't laugh. They asked to see the storage unit in the back, the one where he kept the overflow. That's where they found the second BMW, matching VIN, different registration, stolen from out of state. Things moved fast after that. The lot was taped off, the office seized. Reggie was escorted out in cuffs, red-faced and stammering. Customers gathered outside, watching, phones out, recording. I stood at my bench, wiping grease from my hands, and didn't say a word. The article ran the next morning. Fraud at local garage. Then switching scheme busted by state investigators. My name wasn't mentioned, just an anonymous employee who tipped off authorities. But everyone in the shop knew, even the ones who didn't say it out loud. A few days later, I got a call from Jason. "I saw the news," he said. "That was you, wasn't it?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He laughed, quiet but real. "Thanks for everything." Reggie's trial took a year. He was convicted on multiple counts: fraud, falsifying records, theft. Got 7 years. His assets were liquidated. The shop was auctioned off to pay restitution. I bought it. Cash. New name. New gear. New rules. Jason came back. So did a few others. The same walls, same tools. But something felt different now, like the place had been exorcised. Some days, customers ask if I'm the guy who helped bring down the last owner. I just smile and shake my head. "Don't know anything about that," I say. "I just fix cars." But sometimes, when I'm alone in the bay, I look at the spot where Reggie used to park his BMW and remember the lesson he taught me. If someone poisons your life, you don't scream, you sharpen the knife.